Hi, and welcome to the third episode of North Lanarkshire Live. I'm here with John Wilson. Hello, John.
Hello, Martin. How are you today?
Not bad. So you used to be an MSP?
I used to be a councillor and an MSP.
Okay. And what parties were you in as well?
I started off in the Labour Party when I was a young man, Martin. I was in the Labour Party for 28 years and then joined the SNP just on the eve of the 1999 Scottish Parliament elections and was a member of the SNP for 15 years. And then I joined the Greens when I left the SNP and now currently not affiliated to any political party.
Okay. Do you want to give us a wee rundown on why you left each one then?
Right, I was active in the Labour Party from a teenager. Some people would argue that I was involved in politics from the age of 9, some would say 11, but officially joined the Labour Party when I was 15. Because of social justice issues, actively involved in the Labour Party. I was elected to Falkirk Council in 1980 and served 2 years as a councillor in Falkirk. Before marrying my wife and moving through to Coatbridge, a number of things happened. Was made redundant, moved through to Coatbridge, went to Coatbridge College to further my education, and therefore moved through to this area and resigned as a councillor. Was still actively involved in politics, member of the Labour Party, and until 1999. I was asked to be an election agent for a Labour Party candidate in one of the council elections. I agreed to be the election agent. Unfortunately, I found that the Labour Party in this area, because I came through the Muckman's inquiry, in fact I participated in the Muckman's inquiry, I was the only person from Coatbridge to give evidence to the Labour Party inquiry team in the early 90s. Turned up in a room all by myself, and I think there was about 10, 11 Labour Party executive members sitting there waiting to hear this evidence from Coatbridge. I made a submission and unfortunately nothing happened, and so in 99 when I got sort of back involved, I realised that the Labour Party wasn't the party that I wanted to be. I met a very good SNP candidate, Peter Kearney. He stood 3 times in Coatbridge as the parliamentary candidate, and Peter convinced me that the best way forward, if I was interested in developing Scotland as a nation, as developing the politics of the nation, to join the SNP, which I did. I stood for the SNP in the 2001 Westminster elections, 2003 Scottish Parliament elections, and in 2007 was elected to the Scottish Parliament as an SNP, list MSP. At the same time, I was elected as a councillor in North Lanarkshire Council. I served for 2 years as a councillor in North Lanarkshire because of just the numbers situation in North Lanarkshire, but also dedicated my time to the Scottish Parliament and served in the Scottish Parliament for 9 years and didn't get re-elected at the last Scottish Parliament elections, but had left the Labour Party in 2014.
The SNP.
Sorry, you're right, Martin. The SNP is because of the politics and the way things have worked out. They just they merged in terms of the way the machinations work. But in 2014, I left the SNP, resigned 5 days after the independence referendum because I just felt there was things happening locally, as well as the 2012 decision by the SNP to effectively rescind its decision regarding NATO. I felt that I would stay in the SNP and get the resources into this area to ensure that we could actually promote a yes vote, and after that I decided I would leave the SNP. Sat in the Parliament as an independent for a number of months and then latterly sat in the Parliament as an independent but Green. I wasn't allowed to call myself a Green MSP because the Green Party had a policy that we couldn't call ourselves Green MSPs. I stood as a Green MSP candidate in 2016, and history tells the rest I wasn't elected. I also stood as a Green candidate in the by-election in September last year, and then stood as an independent candidate at the recent government elections.
So one would say that you know a bit about politics then?
I would like to think I know quite a bit about politics because I've lived the experience of, as I said, being in the Labour Party, and if anybody from this area knows the history of Monklands and the reputation Monklands has, then I lived that, and I was never took any real sides in the debate, but I was more interested in ensuring democracy survived, and the fact that the Labour Party presented a case of social democracy and was interested in helping people, protecting people, and likewise when I went into the SNP, that's what I was trying to achieve as well. I saw, and this is where it comes into the 2014 referendum, I always had this vision, once Scotland gained independence, we'd see a realignment of politics. We'd see parties, traditional existing parties would effectively dissolve, new parties would be created, and people could then become part of the party that they felt most closely affiliated with, whether that be the socialist issues, whether that be conservative issues, or unfortunately Liberal Democrat issues. But it's really one of these things that I always felt Scotland could be better, could be a better nation, and the political system that we currently have is too adversarial, that we really need a political system that brings and unites people together. Because in the Scottish Parliament, my experience was the SNP would propose one thing, Labour would object to it just for the principle of it. No, any principles, just object to it. Likewise, if Labour Party suggested something, then the SNP would object to it. And it's really about trying to make sure that the people of Scotland get a better deal out of what's happening, rather than the political parties or political leadership dictating what people should get.
Now, one of the things that you mentioned was that you were an MSP and a councillor at the same time. So you've got insight into the question that we asked on our first episode of Hugh Gaffney MP about, is it feasible to do those two jobs?
I would say it can be, and just so that people get this on the record, I took the decision because I was elected, found out that I was elected at 8:15 on the Friday morning after the Scottish Parliament elections. The count for the local government elections hadn't taken place, and it was about to take place that Friday. So I found out as I was going into the count for the council elections that I'd been elected. Now, when they started doing the counting, we knew, or we had a good indication that I was going to get elected. Now, I took a decision at that point that if I was elected to the council, I would do my duty as a councillor, but I wouldn't take any salary from the council. I'd forgo my salary, and I would only take the salary from the Scottish Parliament. The other issue for the SNP at the time is that there was effectively an instruction from the leader, Alex Salmond, that because there was a number of, there was 5 or 6 SNP members who were elected to both the Scottish Parliament and local government at the same time. And the instruction was, don't stand down, don't have a by-election, because at the time they knew if there was a by-election, the likelihood, particularly in the central belt, it would be the Labour Party who would win the by-election. But I took a decision, and I had to force the issue within the SNP to say that I can't keep on being an MSP and a councillor, because council meetings were being held Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays, parliamentary business Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I was expected to be there at decision time, 5 o'clock every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So what happened is I was beginning to miss out on council meetings. I was still doing the representation, I was still holding those separate surgeries for the council and for the parliament, and I just felt, I needed to resign. But what I did do when I did resign is I spoke to the Chief Executive of the North Lanarkshire Council and said, I'm going to resign as a councillor, but I want the by-election to be held the same day as the European elections. So there would be no additional cost apart from printing up the ballot papers to the public purse. So I managed to get the Chief Executive to agree. My resignation was tendered, and the by-election was held on the same day as the European elections. So I always tried to bear in mind the wishes of the public and also the public purse.
See, we were having this discussion on the first episode about proportional representation. Yes. In terms of by-elections for council elections are kind of slightly rigged in favour of the big parties because it goes back to first past the post. Whereas theoretically, like the Conservative guy in Fortsat that decided he wasn't going to do it.
Yep. Well, he didn't expect to get elected. It's more, he didn't expect to get elected.
Well, I think his official story is he was too ill to do it. So,
Yeah.
you've got to take him at his
Yeah.
word on that. It doesn't really matter in terms of that, but why couldn't those votes have just been Do you know, it seems like a little bit of tiny legislation that just says, this is going to cost you 50 grand. And it seems like, and the only people that can change it are the elected representatives, and obviously you get the feeling that the big parties go, well, actually the by-elections actually suit us quite fine, because obviously with the Fortisat, Labour had already 2 candidates in, and they got to stand a third, which they didn't stand in the original one, so it's really heavily laden towards them, and the person that came, it's not really representing the people that actually voted that Tory in anyway.
I agree with you. As part of my duties as the Deputy Convener, the Local Government and Regeneration Committee between 2011 and 2016, I was tasked by the committee to go and look at the local government election structures, and one of the issues that we did look at was clearly the voting system in by-elections. Now, there's a number of suggestions that were made, and one of the suggestions was that the party who the person represented would then get to nominate somebody. Part of the argument that we got hit with was, well, that's unfair because you're not giving the electorate the opportunity to vote for that person. But knowing elections as well as I do, the majority of people aren't really voting for the individual. What they're doing is voting for the party. So, but with that argument, it would really mean that the parties could bring somebody in. But you're right, a by-election can change the complexion. In North Lanarkshire, by Labour winning Fortisat ward, means that their majority, or as the largest...
Well, all the people that voted for the first 2 got to vote again.
And we've faced by-elections like that here as well, because when I stood down in 2009, it was Labour that won. No, we managed to take 1 seat from Labour in 2007. But when the by-election was held, Labour took the seat again. And it's the same with by-elections, but it depends. It's different issues for different areas, because in some areas where the SNP are strong and they've got the majority of vote in a ward, then they're safeguarding, like Dundee. They would safeguard the position in Dundee because said, well, we want a by-election because we know that we're going to get an SNP member elected. And likewise in the Central Belt, North Lanarkshire, South Lanarkshire, Glasgow, you're likely to, in most wards, to get a Labour Party member elected. And you're right, the system is unfair, and it does cost the public purse money when you do have by-elections. But it's also about making sure, as I said, we did contain within a report the issue about should it not just transfer to the party like they do in the list, because in the list in the Scottish Parliament, what happens is if one of the members resigns from the list, the next one on the list moves in, unless you've exhausted your list.
Right.
But if you've exhausted your list, then nobody gets elected to represent the person that resigns.
So it's I mean, the Hollywood seems the fairest sort of system so far, and STV is really fair when it works, when it's an initial conception. It's certainly better than the way Westminster is decided, which is the first past the post and things like that. The one thing that confuses me slightly is we've got 129 MSPs, we've got 59 MPs.
Yes.
And you sort of think to yourself, right, okay, the MSPs are dealing with powers that are devolved from Westminster. So it's not the same amount of powers that the MPs have to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
Like an MP from London has to deal with all the powers that are in Westminster, whereas an MSP doesn't have to deal with all those same powers. It's like the workload is divided up, but we still need more than double the amount of MSPs to represent us.
Well, you need the 129. There have been debates in the past where people have asked for a reduction, and when they reduced from 72 to 59 MPs, there was a debate took place about reducing the number of MSPs, and some argued that the number should be reduced to, I think it was 109 or 107, because of the way the balance works. Because originally the constituencies mirrored each other in many respects. So there was a debate took place to say, right, we're reducing MPs, we need to lose MSPs. But as you transfer more powers to the Scottish Parliament, then those powers need to be examined and scrutinised. So you really need And there has been a debate lately of actually increasing the number of MSPs to take account of all the other subject matters. Now, what's happened in terms of the reforms within the Scottish Parliament is they've reduced the number of MSPs sitting in committees, which I think, in my own opinion, is unfair, because what you're actually then doing is putting more onus on 4 or 5 members on a committee to consider legislation, important legislation such as health, education, planning, areas of vast importance to the people of Scotland are being then looked at or examined by fewer people. And that's where you then, because in terms of everybody thinks the 650 MPs will scrutinise all the legislation. The scrutiny of the legislation is done by the committee structures, and the committee structures bring forward recommendations, amendments to the legislation, and you need people who are interested in doing that have some knowledge or are prepared to go and do the background work to make sure that what we get is legislation that's workable, legislation that fits, and legislation that is future-proofed.
Yeah, it's just, again, it comes back to why would you need more MSPs to do the job that the MPs were expected to do with a lesser number? Do you see what I'm getting at?
But the thing is that those 59 MPs were part of
The 650.
So that in terms of the number of the MPs that Scotland sends down to Westminster, then they were part of a larger grouping in Westminster, and the scrutiny in the legislation process in Westminster is slightly different from the Scottish Parliament and the way the Scottish Government operates. So that 650, you've got a larger number there. And yes, up until fairly recently, the legislative issues that Westminster were looking at was greater than the Scottish Government or the Scottish Parliament. But now more and more powers that we hope are being transferred over, then it means that like Social Security has got to be examined by the parliamentarians in Scotland to make sure what we have in place is the best system for Scotland that can operate. Now that takes time, it takes effort, and it takes the deliberation by committee members to ensure what they put forward, both in the reports and both in legislative amendments, fits what we're trying to achieve.
One of the things I've got written down here is because we were talking about MPs, MSPs, and you brought it up yourself when you were talking about being a councillor and an MSP, that you couldn't be in 2 places at once. Mm-hmm. Should there be a change in the law in terms of attendance for MPs, MSPs, councillors? Because basically you've got some councillors or MSPs that have got like an attendance rate of like 42%. Now I know myself, if I turned up 90% of the time at my work, I'd be sacked. Yeah. So, do you know there is
major issues in terms of now, and my experience in the Scottish Parliament, the Whip's office usually ensure that people are attending and are there for decision time, unless there is a serious illness with the individual, and that usually, I think, the experience has been it's up to about 6 months, but the Whips are constantly at you to make sure that you're there. And the local government, and I can speak from local government experience, is that you only have to attend one committee meeting every 6 months, and you can continue to pick up your councillor's allowance. That's where I think it all falls apart. And the attendance, a number of us have attempted to try and get the attendance records in North Lanarkshire of councillors. And I would have thought the political parties, all political parties in North Lanarkshire, would be keen to release those figures. But for some strange reason, they seem to be loath to do that. And it would be beneficial for the electorate to be able to see how often or the elected member turns up to committee meetings, what committee meetings they do turn up to, and what their attendance is like. Because you're right, you talked about 42%, Martin. I can tell you there were some councillors in North Lanarkshire, you were lucky if they were attending 1 or 2 meetings every 6 months, but they were still picking up
the full pay,
their allowance. So it's about trying to ensure that people that your elected representative is there, attends those meetings, but there's another issue about whether or not the elected representative represents your interests, because in many cases elected members represent either the interest of the party or their own interests rather than the interests of their constituents and the electorate.
Because in some ways you have to look at, again, you were talking about the chap in Forsyth, and we talked about him earlier. You have to respect the fact that he didn't just say, "Aye, fine," and just never turned up and just collected that cash and just went, who cares? Nobody ever checks anyway. I mean, I can remember when Gordon Brown stood down and said, "I'm quitting frontline politics," and then the election came around and people went, "Wait a minute, he's still an MP," because you don't quit as an MP, you just wander off and sit in the back bench for the rest of your term.
Or sit in Dunfermline and rake in £100,000 for speaking tours or book deals.
Yeah.
That's the difficulty of what your MPs and your well, not so much MSPs.
Well, when it trickles all the way down to councillors as well.
Yeah,
So.
it's when you get that, and that's where I think people become disillusioned with politics, and people are, in many respects, disillusioned with politics because they don't know when you get turnouts of 34% for local government elections and a local government by-election. 20% turnouts, you get 50% turnouts for Holyrood elections, and then you get 55-60% turnouts for Westminster elections. That's where the system falls apart, because the difficulty is who are you then really representing? Because in Westminster, you're right, then if you're getting a 55%, 60% turnout of constituents to vote, and somebody's elected on 30% of the electorate, then that's only less than a third of the electorate want that person to represent them. And in Holyrood, you've got a situation where you've got the constituency elections, which are still running the first past the post, but then you've got the top-up list that basically tries to even it out. But some of us would argue that that has to be turned round the other way, that what you actually have is more in your top-up list than you do in terms of constituencies, so that people do genuinely get more proportional representation in that sense, because at the present moment, the anomaly in the system is if you take all the constituencies in a particular region, you don't get anybody on the list, despite the fact you might have the highest number of votes on the list votes, but you don't get anybody elected. That happened to Labour Party in '99, happened to Labour Party in 2003, it now happened to the SNP in 2016 because they got the most, they took every constituency MSP in central Scotland, therefore didn't get anybody on the list.
Right, and so getting back to local stuff, because I think we've given everyone a nice big lesson on politics and MSPs and NSPs and how they're all a shower. No, local stuff. It's was it Belhaven Park Muirhead development? I don't know if you know much about this.
I know something about it, which you're going to refer to as going into the wooded area and creating a road in the wooded area. The issue with that, Martin, is the planning legislation and the way planning legislation is carried forward. We rely on local government officers and planning departments to ensure that developers work to and work alongside any conditions that are put into any development. Now, my understanding of what's happened here is the developer or the house builder decided they needed another access road onto the site. Now, this may be true or may not be true, but they had approached planning officers and asked planning officers to get access onto the site from another way. And what they decided was to go through a wooded area, and it's a historical wood, and that's what I think has upset a number of people, is that wood was there. They saw the developer going in and basically flattening it. But the difficulty is that we have conditions that are set on developments, and these are known as Section 75 conditions, which the planning department and planning officers list to and provide to the developer and say, you have got to comply with these conditions. But in many cases what's happened is developers are going back to the planning department saying, I know you said in Section 75 we weren't to do X, Y and Z, however we think that's too restrictive, can we get a waiver of that? Or they go for retrospective planning consent. Now, when the local people saw the original planning development taking place and the approval for that, they'd have seen the Section 75 conditions, they'd have seen the plans as laid out in terms of what the developer was doing. But any amendments to the Section 75 or any changes to the plans as proposed by the developer doesn't go back to committee and isn't subject to the same scrutiny as the original planning application. So we need to make sure that planning is actually, people, local, particularly local people, have a say in any changes that take place. But we have planning discussions at the present moment where the Scottish Government say they're going to revise the planning legislation. Now I've just went to a meeting last week. I know I was invited on to come speak to you last week. But I was at an event in Edinburgh by Planning Democracy, who are concerned. One, the major issue is equal right of appeal. The other issue is about the changes that are taking place in planning decisions, and they seem to be taking place without any consultation, without any consideration to objectors. And we need to look at that issue and make sure that these issues are being dealt with. But in this case, I think the developer went in just gung-ho, decided what to do, and just hoped that they would get away with it in terms of either retrospective or a waiver in Section 75.
So as I'm not a resident myself in the area, but if I was a resident of that area, who should be my first port of call to contact?
Your first port of call should be your local councillor. The next port of call I would suggest to everybody is go and speak to your local MSP and your MSP, your list MSPs, because to make them aware of the blatant disregard that this developer had for the planning regulations to do what they're doing, especially when Nicola Sturgeon, as First Minister, announced in her speech in the Parliament, the session of Parliament, that there would be planning legislation coming forward. Now, one of the fears is that, having read the report that was commissioned in 2015, that there could be a fast tracking of planning decisions.
Right.
We need to make sure that local people have an opportunity to object to and have their voice heard in planning decisions, and that we don't get a situation where developments are allowed to be fast tracked because it's argued it brings in economic benefit to the community. The community that's already there need to be aware of the issues that are coming up.
It seems to be a problem that's growing at the moment because, I mean, a quick look around most of the Facebook groups and social media, Twitter and things like that, and you look in, especially in North Lanarkshire, is you've got people having issues with what's going on at View Park, Glen.
Yep.
You've got issues what's going on obviously off at Belhaven Park, and then you've got people with issues of what's going to happen at Carnbrough as well. But nobody seems to know who's responsible for this. Everyone seems to be saying it's someone else's.
Well, just to take the Carnbrough, since you mentioned the pyrolysis plant as a posh name for an incinerator, that was a decision that was, despite the council planning committee and the council objecting to that going ahead, the developer decided to appeal to the Scottish Government. The Scottish Government allowed that development to take place, and now there's been changes, and this goes back to the Section 75 conditions and the planning consent that was granted initially. Those changes have come about, or are proposed to come about, without further consultation with the community, and the community are picking this up because apparently the developer that wants to go on that site has decided to extend the site further. So therefore the community are quite rightly concerned because they objected. They joined with the council, North Lanarkshire Council, to go to the court of session, because that unfortunately is the only right of appeal in one of these decisions, is to go to the court of session. And the council were prepared to fund that right of appeal to the court of session. But the difficulty is not every community group has that opportunity to have either a council supporting them or financial backing to go to the court of session through the right of appeal. That's why I mentioned the planning democracy issue, because planning democracy are asking for an equal right of appeal to objectors regarding planning decisions, so that you don't have to, and we're currently discussing how the best way to take that forward. But at the present moment, the local authority, the government, Scottish Government, will tell you you have a right of appeal if you want to object to that. But that right of appeal is through the court of session, and it could cost you up to £50,000 for the privilege of doing that. So what we're asking for is there should be an equal right of appeal that doesn't cost the objectors to a planning development £50,000.
Okay, so I think we've done about half an hour, I think. So I'm just going to finish off with one final question, right? And it's a hard one. What do you think can be done to regain the trust of the electorate for politicians?
I think, given the discussions that have been on Facebook about North Lanarkshire Live, and given some of the issues regarding the credibility of elected members, whether that be councillors, MSPs or MPs, is the fact they need to be seen to be acting more in harmony with their constituents, and coming on to programmes like this would help people get a better understanding and be able to afford them the opportunity to listen to the individuals. Now, we're a City Nation in the lead up to the Westminster election and Scottish Parliament elections, where the candidates were invited to go along to public hustings, and some candidates decided not to attend those hustings, but they are still looking for the vote, the electorate's vote. And we need to get the message over to all elected members or all candidates that if they're serious about getting their views heard and getting the electorate to understand what they stand for, then they have to make themselves available to the public, and public meetings, North Lanarkshire Live, things like this are the best way to get that message over. That's if they want that message to be heard.
I think the problem is with that is though that obviously there's not going to be an election for another 3 years for the Holyrood election, so there's no need for them to publicly engage at the moment. You would hope they would, but you would kind of hope that they'd get ready for that, because I think when the election comes round, if we're still going, we would want to do some hustings. Because the thing is, when the reason for them really just going, I'm not going to husting, is it's usually there's only, at maximum, there's going to be 80 people in a room, and they think, well, I don't need to go there and make a mistake. Whereas if they're doing a hustings and it's streamed live, the whole electorate
have the opportunity
to see what these people are about and get a feel for what the candidate is as well. Because again, there's people standing that you don't even know who they are when they're standing. Traditionally, usually, well, not, I doubt it'll be the same the next one, but traditionally the Conservative candidates tend to be people that have never stood before. It seems to be young people that are flown up to stand. But I think that'll change probably now that they've got like 9 councillors. They'll see this as a chance to maybe get a foothold.
Well, maybe they will, but the issue is about too many candidates rely on the party label to get themselves elected. They don't rely on the traditional way that you would get your message over as a candidate, that you basically do the public events, the hustings, the doorstepping, the street work that was traditionally done as candidates. Unfortunately, a lot of the candidates that have been see themselves getting elected to either local government or to the Scottish Parliament in Westminster are candidates who just have the party ticket against their name, and people, as I said earlier, are voting for the party rather than the individual that they're electing. It doesn't matter who, and we see that in terms of the way people vote in even the list in the Scottish Parliament, or in terms of council elections, the multi-member ward. They will go to, oh yeah, that's Labour there, that's my first Labour candidate, one for them. Oh, that's my first SNP candidate, that's one for them. So it's that, trying to break that down and say, right, do you know who you're voting for? Do you know what they stand for? Do you know what they want to represent? And are they prepared to represent you? And what is their experience? What are they going to bring to the job that they're doing? Because they're all picking up a salary. You want to know what they're doing, because if we did it in as I said, 2015 Scottish Parliament elections, we had hustings. We did the situation where one of the Labour candidates wouldn't turn up to hustings. We did it in the last time where one of the SNP candidates refused to turn up to hustings. So
well, I think I can remember coming to a hustings that you were at, and it was Elaine Smith didn't turn up, but she sent her assistant to it.
Yes.
That was at the...
No, she didn't send her assistant. She sent forgot who it was that she sent along, but she sent one of her list colleagues along.
And it was at the Conforty Institute, and they obviously sent a very angry woman as well to shout at a lot of people. And then I think there was one in the 2016 one where Fulton McGregor, who's now an MSP, was out collecting rubbish on the same night. So sometimes there's conflicts between stuff you're doing, and you can't make it.
But there's priorities in terms of going out, picking up litter with your party political colleagues, or in the Conforty one, the Hustings event, I think there was well over 150 people there that turned up for that Hustings, because the people wanted to hear what the candidates had to say, but they also wanted to question the candidates. So there's an issue there about making yourself available, making yourself publicly available to answer the difficult questions. And I know there was an infamous Hustings event that took place a number of years ago in Coatbridge, where one of the MP candidates blasted one of the questioners, and the person was trying to be helpful to that candidate, but they decided to, and people, I think, decided after that, no, I'm not going to go to another Hustings event, because if that's the way the public are going to be treated, because they asked a question that was dear to their heart, or an interest that they wanted to get answered.
I mean, my feeling is it's not only your right to question your elected representatives, it's your duty to do it.
And it's your right as an elected member, that I've always believed, that to be accountable to your electorate, to actually act on behalf of your electorate, and make sure that you're doing your best for them, irrespective of the political views that the individual holds. That if somebody comes to you with a genuine concern and a genuine issue that they want you to deal with, and I've dealt with some weird and wonderful issues as an elected member, but you're there to represent the best interests of that individual. You're there to make a case on behalf of that constituent, whether you agree with them or not, whether you know what way they voted in an election wasn't for you as a political party, or they voted in a particular referendum. You're there to actually represent their interests, their wishes, and make representation to get an answer, because for many people what they're basically looking for is an answer to the question that they can't seem to get from anywhere else. And as an MSP or a councillor, you have that title that you can then challenge individuals, officials, civil servants, to give you an answer that they might not be happy with giving you, but it's an answer you can then pass on to your constituent and say, I've dealt with this issue. And what I used to do is, anytime I used to write to all these officials, because the best way to get an answer was to get, because I learnt a lesson many, many years ago, that if you don't put it in writing, then there's nothing can be done with a verbal response. But if you put it in writing and you get a written response, then that gives you the opportunity to give that written question or the issue that you've sent to the civil servant or the council official, and then get the answer alongside that in a written form. Then that satisfies many of the constituents, because at least they've got an answer then. They know that you've made the representation. They know that you've got an answer. They might not be happy with that answer, but at least you've done your duty by them and made sure that they've got a response.
Well, thanks very much for coming in, John.
Thank
It's
you
been
very much indeed.
most educational. Right, we'll be back next Friday, 3 to 5. Thanks very much for watching. Hopefully, we'll get an elected representative on for next week. I think John can testify that we're not too hard to chat to. Come along, give us a chat.